In the year 490 BC, on a dusty plain near the village of Marathon, the fate of Greece and perhaps all of Western civilization hung by a thread. A vast Persian army, sent by King Darius to punish Athens, landed on Greek soil with overwhelming numbers. Facing them stood a small band of citizen soldiers, farmers turned warriors, led by the bold general Miltiades. What followed was not just a battle, but a legend, a desperate charge, a clash of steel, and a stunning victory that echoed through the ages. This is the story of the Battle of Marathon, the day when courage and strategy overcame empire. By the late 6th century BC, the Persian Empire was the most powerful force in the known world. Founded by Cyrus the Great and expanded by Cambyses and Darius I, it stretched from the Indus River in the east to the Aegean in the west, encompassing countless peoples and cultures. Its wealth was unmatched, its armies vast, and its kings styled themselves King of Kings. Darius I, a master organizer and conqueror, sought not only to expand Persia's borders, but also to impose order on those who resisted. To him, the Greek city-states on the western fringes of his empire were rebellious troublemakers. The spark came in 499 BC, when the Ionian Greeks of Asia Minor, culturally Greek but under Persian control, rose in revolt. Supported by Athens and Eretria, the rebels dared to burn Sardis, a Persian satrapal capital. Though the rebellion was eventually crushed, Darius never forgot the insult. He vowed to punish the Greeks who had dared to defy him. According to Herodotus, the king even had a servant remind him daily, "Master, remember the Athenians." The Persian court began preparing for a punitive expedition, not merely to punish Athens and Eretria, but to bring all of Greece into the fold of empire. Greece in 490 BC was a land of fierce independence but constant rivalry. The city-states, Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and many others, shared language, religion, and culture, but rarely united. Their armies were made of citizen soldiers, hoplites who fought in tight phalanxes. While disciplined and courageous, they were vastly outnumbered by Persia's professional armies. For Persia, Greece was a peripheral nuisance. For Greece, Persia was an existential threat. The collision was inevitable. When the Ionian revolt collapsed in 494 BC, Persia reasserted control with brutal efficiency. Cities were punished, populations uprooted, and order restored. Yet for King Darius, this was not enough. To leave Athens and Eretria unpunished would invite further rebellion. To strike them would not only avenge the insult, but also remind the wider Greek world of the futility of resistance. Darius's anger was personal as much as political. The burning of Sardis had been a humiliation, and humiliation was poison to the prestige of a king of kings. In the ideology of the Persian Empire, all peoples owed obedience. Those who resisted were not merely rebellious but disorderly, threatening the divine order, Asher, that the Persian monarch was charged with maintaining. Thus, from Susa and Persepolis came the decree: the Greeks would be punished. The first attempt to subdue Greece came in 492 BC under the command of Mardonius, Darius's son-in-law. With a large army and fleet, he moved along the coast of Thrace and Macedonia, re-establishing Persian authority in the north. But disaster struck. Off the coast of Mount Athos, a sudden storm wrecked hundreds of ships, drowning men and horses alike. At the same time, Thracian tribes ambushed his retreating forces. Though Mardonius managed to reassert Persian dominance in some regions, the expedition fell short of its ultimate goal. Athens and Eretria remained free. 2 years later, Darius prepared a more direct and focused strike. This time, the expedition was entrusted to two commanders, Datis the Mede and Artaphernes, nephew of the king. The fleet numbered perhaps 600 triremes, carrying as many as 25,000 troops, Persians, Medes, and subject peoples from across the empire. Their mission was simple: punish Athens and Eretria, subdue Greece, and secure the Aegean. The strategy was bold. Rather than march overland through hostile terrain, the Persians would sail directly across the Aegean, using their fleet as a mobile base. This demonstrated Persia's mastery of the seas and its ability to strike wherever it chose. Their first target was Eretria, a city on the island of Euboea that had aided the Ionian revolt. Despite brave resistance, Eretria was betrayed from within. Some citizens opened the gates, and the city fell. True to Darius's command, the Persians sacked Eretria, burned its temples, and enslaved its population. The lesson was clear: those who defied Persia would be annihilated. Now only Athens stood in the Persians' path. The Athenians were in a desperate position. Their city lacked strong walls. Those would only be built later, after the Persian Wars. Their hoplite army numbered perhaps 9,000 citizens, reinforced by a small force from the nearby town of Plataea, bringing their total to around 10,000 men. Against them loomed a Persian force more than twice their size. The Athenians turned to their greatest strength, their political system. As a democracy, decisions were made by the people. The assembly voted to resist, and the army marched to meet the invaders rather than waiting for them to attack the city. This bold decision placed Athens' survival on a single gamble: win in the field or perish. Knowing they could not face Persia alone, Athens sent a runner named Pheidippides to Sparta, nearly 150 miles away, to beg for aid. According to Herodotus, Pheidippides made the journey in just 2 days, a feat of endurance that inspired the modern marathon race. The Spartans listened sympathetically, but they were in the midst of a religious festival, the Carnia, during which no army could march until the full moon. They promised to send help, but only after the festival ended. Thus Athens was left to face Persia largely alone, with only their allies from Plataea standing beside them. The Persians chose to land at Marathon, a broad plain northeast of Athens. It was an ideal site: flat ground for their cavalry, open access to the sea for their fleet, and enough space to deploy their massive army. From there, they could either march directly on Athens or draw the Athenians into battle. The Athenians, under the command of their strategoi, generals, marched out to block the road from Marathon to Athens. Among them was Miltiades, a veteran who had once served in Persia, but now turned his knowledge against them. For several days, the two armies faced each other across the plain, neither side willing to commit. The Persians waited for the Athenians to disperse. The Athenians, heavily outnumbered, hesitated to attack. But time was against Athens. The Persians might sail around and strike the undefended city. A decision had to be made. Miltiades urged immediate action. Better to attack on chosen ground than to wait and risk betrayal or encirclement. The other generals debated fiercely, but eventually the deciding vote went to the polemarch Callimachus, who sided with Miltiades. The die was cast. The Athenians would march into legend. When the Persian fleet anchored off Marathon, it brought with it the might of an empire that stretched from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea. Its commanders, Datis the Mede and Artaphernes, had gathered a force that represented the diversity of Persia's vast dominion. The core of the army was made up of Persians and Medes, experienced infantry equipped with wicker shields, short spears, and bows. Their style of warfare emphasized mobility, archery, and cavalry, in stark contrast to the heavy infantry tactics of the Greeks. Lightly armored but highly disciplined, these troops had crushed rebellions and fought across countless frontiers. Alongside them fought contingents from subject peoples, Saka horsemen from the steppes, Bactrians from the east, Egyptians and Ionians who had been forced to serve their Persian overlords. Together they numbered perhaps 25,000 to 30,000, though ancient sources like Herodotus inflate the figures to far higher numbers. But it was not sheer numbers that gave Persia its strength, it was its cavalry. The Persian horsemen, armed with javelins and bows, could outflank slower enemies, harry them with missiles and break their formations. On the open plain of Marathon, the cavalry was the hammer meant to smash the Greek phalanx. Facing this vast host stood a far smaller army, 9,000 Athenians, joined by about 1,000 Plataeans, the only city to answer Athens' call for aid. The Greek hoplites were citizen soldiers, men who owned enough property to afford armor and weapons. Each bore a bronze helmet, a breastplate or linen cuirass, greaves, and most importantly, the great round hoplon shield from which their name derived. Their primary weapon was the dory, a spear around 7 to 9 feet long, used for thrusting in tight formation. At their sides hung short swords, a secondary weapon for when the spear broke. What made the hoplites formidable was not the individual warrior, but the phalanx, a formation in which each man's shield protected his neighbor. Fighting shoulder to shoulder, they formed a human wall of bronze and wood, difficult to break from the front. Discipline and unity were their greatest strengths. Yet the hoplites had vulnerabilities. They were slow, heavy, and ill-suited for prolonged pursuit. If flanked or encircled, their cohesion could collapse. Against Persian archers, their armor offered protection, but if caught in the open for too long, even hoplites could be worn down by volleys of arrows. On paper, the balance of forces was grim for the Greeks. Outnumbered at least 2-1, facing cavalry and archers with no horsemen of their own, the Athenians should have been crushed. But the Athenians had advantages of their own. They fought on home soil with their city at their backs. Their morale was high, knowing that the freedom of their families depended on their courage. They also had commanders like Miltiades, who understood Persian tactics and sought to neutralize their strengths. Moreover, the hoplite phalanx had one decisive edge. In close combat, man for man, the heavily armored Greeks could overwhelm the lighter Persian infantry. The challenge lay in reaching the enemy lines without being destroyed by archery or cavalry. At last, the deadlock on the plain of Marathon broke. The Athenians could no longer afford to wait. Every day of hesitation risked betrayal in Athens or a Persian sail-around. Miltiades knew it. Hesitation was death. So, at dawn, when the Persian cavalry had temporarily withdrawn from the field, perhaps to water their horses or embark for a flanking maneuver, Miltiades gave the signal. The Athenian phalanx would advance. It was a bold gamble. To attack across the plain exposed the Greeks to Persian arrows and to the possibility that the cavalry might return. Yet the Athenians trusted Miltiades. He had fought alongside the Persians before in earlier years and understood their methods. He had devised a daring plan that would turn their own numbers against them. Traditionally, the Greek phalanx fought in deep, compact ranks, concentrating its strength at the center. But Miltiades ordered the opposite. He deliberately thinned the center of the line while reinforcing the wings. The Athenian formation stretched wide enough to match the Persian front. The plan was dangerous. A weakened center might collapse under pressure. But Miltiades wagered that the stronger wings of heavy hoplites could smash through the lighter Persian flanks, then wheel inward and crush the center in a pincer. It was a gamble of genius, or madness. At Miltiades' command, the Athenians began to advance. At first, they marched in measured step, their shields interlocking, their spears leveled forward. The ground shook under the tread of nearly 10,000 armored men. Then, in a stunning move, the order was given to run. Herodotus tells us that the Greeks sprinted the final distance across the plain, nearly a mile, to minimize the time under Persian archery fire. To the Persians, this must have seemed suicidal. Heavily armored men charging at full speed across open ground. Surely they would collapse before they reached the line, but the hoplites were not untrained rabble. They were citizens defending their homes, men hardened by years of drill and farm labor. With a war cry echoing over the plain, they rushed forward, shields raised, bronze flashing in the sunlight. The Persian archers loosed volley after volley. Arrows rained down, striking shields, helmets, and flesh. Some hoplites fell, but the line did not break. The wall of bronze surged forward, faster and faster, until it crashed into the Persian front like a thunderbolt. The collision was brutal. The lighter Persian infantry, used to skirmishing and loose formations, found themselves face to face with a solid wall of bronze and oak. The Greek spears thrust forward in unison, punching through wicker shields, piercing armor, driving men backward. The ground became a chaos of screams and steel. The Persians tried to hold, their commanders shouting for order, their soldiers stabbing with short spears and scimitars. But against the sheer weight of the phalanx, they bent and gave ground. On the wings, the Athenian plan worked brilliantly. The heavy hoplites smashed into the Persian flanks, cutting them down and driving them toward the sea. But in the center, disaster loomed. Miltiades had deliberately weakened his center, and the Persians took advantage. Against the thinned ranks of Athenians, the Persian infantry surged forward. The Greeks there were pushed back, their line bending inward. For a moment, it seemed the Persians might split the Athenian army in two. Dust and blood clouded the air. The clash of bronze on iron rang out over the plain. Men shouted, screamed, and died. But Miltiades had foreseen this. His strategy depended on it. As the Persian center advanced, they exposed their flanks. On both wings, the victorious Athenians wheeled inward, pivoting like great bronze doors closing shut. The trap snapped closed. The Persians in the center, who had been driving forward with confidence, suddenly found themselves attacked from three sides. Confusion turned to panic. Hoplite spears stabbed from every direction. Persian soldiers stumbled, collided, and fell. Some tried to retreat, but their own numbers hemmed them in. What had seemed a breakthrough became a slaughter. Herodotus describes it simply: the Persians were surrounded and cut down in heaps. The once proud army of the great king dissolved into chaos. As the Persian line collapsed, survivors fled toward the safety of their ships. The plain became a nightmare of fleeing men pursued by relentless hoplites. The Greeks showed no mercy. Every Persian who turned his back was cut down. Wicker shields and broken bows littered the ground. Streams of blood darkened the earth. Near the shore, desperate Persians tried to board their ships, fighting each other in panic. Some waded into the surf, clinging to ropes as the ships pushed off. Others drowned under the weight of their armor. The Athenians pursued all the way to the water's edge, even seizing 7 Persian ships before being driven back. When the dust settled, the Athenians stood victorious. According to Herodotus, the Persians lost 6,400 men that day. The Athenians lost only 192, including Callimachus, the polemarch, who had cast the deciding vote for battle. The contrast was staggering. Against all odds, the smaller Greek force had annihilated a mighty Persian expedition, but the victory was not without cost. The field was strewn with bodies, both friend and foe. Exhausted hoplites leaned on their spears, their armor spattered with blood, their throats raw from shouting. They had survived, but they knew the war was not yet over. Even as the Athenians celebrated, danger still loomed. The Persian fleet, though bloodied, remained powerful. If it sailed south, it could reach Athens before the army could return. Here, legend enters the story. A runner, often said to be Phidippides, is believed to have raced from Marathon to Athens, a distance of about 26 miles, to announce the victory and warn of the approaching fleet. Breathless, he is said to have gasped out a single word, "Nenike kamen," "We are victorious," before collapsing dead from exhaustion. Whether or not this story is true, it captures the urgency of the moment. The Athenians, despite their triumph, had no time to rest. They would have to march immediately back to their city to defend it from a second strike. The Battle of Marathon was not merely a clash of armies, it was a clash of worlds. The Persian Empire, vast and mighty, had been humbled by a small citizen army defending its freedom. In that moment, the Greeks proved that courage, discipline, and clever strategy could defeat overwhelming numbers. Marathon became a symbol, not just of victory, but of defiance. It was the spark that lit a flame across Greece, a flame that would burn brighter in the years to come through Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Miltiades had deliberately weakened his center, and the Persians took advantage. Against the thinned ranks of Athenians, the Persian infantry surged forward. The Greeks there were pushed back, their line bending inward. For a moment, it seemed the Persians might split the Athenian army in two. Dust and blood clouded the air. The clash of bronze on iron rang out over the plain. Men shouted, screamed, and died. But Miltiades had foreseen this. His strategy depended on it. As the Persian center advanced, they exposed their flanks. On both wings, the victorious Athenians wheeled inward, pivoting like great bronze doors closing shut. The trap snapped closed. The Persians in the center, who had been driving forward with confidence, suddenly found themselves attacked from three sides. Confusion turned to panic. Hoplite spears stabbed from every direction. Persian soldiers stumbled, collided, and fell. Some tried to retreat, but their own numbers hemmed them in. What had seemed a breakthrough became a slaughter. Herodotus describes it simply: the Persians were surrounded and cut down in heaps. The once proud army of the great king dissolved into chaos. As the Persian line collapsed, survivors fled toward the safety of their ships. The plain became a nightmare of fleeing men pursued by relentless hoplites. The Greeks showed no mercy. Every Persian who turned his back was cut down. Wicker shields and broken bows littered the ground. Streams of blood darkened the earth. Near the shore, desperate Persians tried to board their ships, fighting each other in panic. Some waded into the surf, clinging to ropes as the ships pushed off. Others drowned under the weight of their armor. The Athenians pursued all the way to the water's edge, even seizing 7 Persian ships before being driven back. When the dust settled, the Athenians stood victorious. According to Herodotus, the Persians lost 6,400 men that day. The Athenians lost only 192, including Callimachus, the Polemarch, who had cast the deciding vote for battle. The contrast was staggering. Against all odds, the smaller Greek force had annihilated a mighty Persian expedition, but the victory was not without cost. The field was strewn with bodies, both friend and foe. Exhausted hoplites leaned on their spears, their armor spattered with blood, their throats raw from shouting. They had survived, but they knew the war was not yet over. Even as the Athenians celebrated, danger still loomed. The Persian fleet, though bloodied, remained powerful. If it sailed south, it could reach Athens before the army could return. Here, legend enters the story. A runner, often said to be Phidippides, is believed to have raced from Marathon to Athens, a distance of about 26 miles, to announce the victory and warn of the approaching fleet. Breathless, he is said to have gasped out a single word, "Nenika kamen," "We are victorious," before collapsing dead from exhaustion. Whether or not this story is true, it captures the urgency of the moment. The Athenians, despite their triumph, had no time to rest. They would have to march immediately back to their city to defend it from a second strike. The Battle of Marathon was not merely a clash of armies, it was a clash of worlds. The Persian Empire, vast and mighty, had been humbled by a small citizen army defending its freedom. In that moment, the Greeks proved that courage, discipline, and clever strategy could defeat overwhelming numbers. Marathon became a symbol, not just of victory, but of defiance. It was the spark that lit a flame across Greece, a flame that would burn brighter in the years to come through Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. The plain of Marathon was quiet at last. Where hours earlier tens of thousands had clashed in blood and fury, now only the dead remained. The Athenians, though exhausted, knew there was little time to celebrate. Messengers arrived with chilling news. The Persian fleet, though beaten back at Marathon, had set sail again. Its target was clear, Athens itself. If the city fell before the army returned, all their sacrifice would have been in vain. The Persian strategy was simple. While the army was pinned at Marathon, the fleet would circle Cape Sunion and descend on the undefended capital. For the Athenians, the real race had just begun. Miltiades wasted no time. Gathering his men, bloodied but unbroken, he gave the order to march. The hoplites, though weary from battle, understood what was at stake. So began one of the most extraordinary forced marches in history. The Athenian army, still in armor, advanced rapidly across the rugged terrain back toward their city, nearly 26 miles, the same distance later commemorated in the modern marathon race. Every step was agony. Feet blistered, muscles cramped, wounds bled beneath the weight of heavy armor. Yet no man fell out of line. They had fought for their homes at Marathon. Now they would defend them once more at Athens. By the time the Persians rounded Cape Sunion, expecting an undefended city, they saw to their shock the Athenian army already drawn up. Shields glinting, spears leveled, the trap had failed. Legend tells us that it was the runner Phidippides who brought the news of victory from Marathon to Athens. After racing across the plain and through the hills, he is said to have burst into the assembly, crying out, "Nenika kamen! We are victorious!" before collapsing dead from exhaustion. Whether true or not, the tale symbolizes the sacrifice and urgency of that day. It was not only a military triumph, but also a desperate struggle of endurance, where every heartbeat mattered. When the Persian fleet saw the Athenian hoplites arrayed in defense of their city, they hesitated. The element of surprise was lost. To attempt a landing against fresh defenders would be costly. Worse, morale among the Persians was shaken. Their army had been shattered, their fleet bloodied. Datis and Artaphernes, the Persian commanders, chose to withdraw. The invasion of Greece was over, for now. But the message was clear. Persia would return. The Athenians returned to their city as heroes. Word spread quickly of the miraculous victory. Against overwhelming odds, the citizens had defeated the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. The dead were honored with a burial mound on the field of Marathon, still visible today. The 192 Athenians who fell were remembered as martyrs, their names inscribed in stone for future generations. The Persians had lost thousands, their bodies left to rot on the plain or swept into the sea. Marathon had shown the world that the Persian Empire was not invincible. More than a military triumph, Marathon was a triumph of freedom over tyranny. The Athenians had fought not as subjects of a king, but as citizens defending their own land. Their victory became a rallying cry for all of Greece. Even the Spartans, who had arrived too late to join the battle, recognized its significance. They marched to Marathon, inspected the battlefield, and acknowledged the Athenians' courage. From that day onward, the name Marathon became synonymous with defiance, endurance, and the will to fight for liberty. For King Darius in Persia, the defeat was a humiliation. The empire that had subdued countless peoples had been repelled by a small city-state. He vowed vengeance. Preparations began for an even greater invasion, one that would dwarf the expedition of Marathon. Yet fate intervened. Darius died before he could launch his new campaign. His son, Xerxes, inherited the throne, and with it, the determination to crush Greece once and for all. Marathon, then, was not the end of the Persian threat, but the beginning of a far greater conflict, the Greco-Persian Wars that would shape the destiny of the ancient world. In the years following Marathon, Athens underwent a transformation. The victory gave confidence to the democratic system, showing that free citizens could defend themselves without kings or tyrants. It also gave Athens prestige among the Greek city-states. From a relatively minor polis, Athens was now recognized as the shield of Greece. Yet pride carried dangers. Miltiades himself, though celebrated as a hero, would later fall into disgrace. His career ended in failure, and he died a broken man. Still, his name would forever be tied to the field of Marathon, where he had delivered one of history's most brilliant victories. A legend says that the Athenians swore an oath before the battle, never to yield, never to forget those who died, and always to defend the freedom of their city. Whether fact or myth, the Marathon Oath became part of Athenian culture, inspiring future generations to resist foreign domination. This oath echoed again during the later wars against Persia, at Thermopylae, Salamis, and Plataea. Marathon was not merely a battle, it was the first chapter of a long saga. Marathon's impact stretched far beyond Greece. Historians through the ages have seen it as a turning point in world history. Had the Persians triumphed, Greek independence and the flowering of democracy, philosophy, and classical culture might have been crushed in its cradle. Instead, the victory ensured that the Greek experiment in self-rule would continue. The ripple effects of that survival can still be felt today. Marathon, in a sense, safeguarded the future of Western civilization. Perhaps the most enduring legacy for the modern world is the story of Phidippides. Whether myth or truth, the image of a lone runner bringing news of victory to Athens, then collapsing in death, captured the imagination of later generations. In 1896, when the modern Olympic Games were revived in Athens, the organizers introduced a long-distance race to honor that legendary run. Thus, the marathon race was born, carrying the name of the battle across the world. Today, millions run marathons each year, unknowingly echoing the endurance of an ancient messenger who carried the hope of a city. On a plain outside Athens, in 490 BC, fewer than 10,000 Greeks stood against the might of Persia. They fought not for conquest or glory, but for survival. Against the odds, they triumphed. Their victory changed history. It gave Greece the courage to resist, ensured the survival of democracy, and set the stage for the flowering of classical civilization. The men of Marathon became immortal, not only in memory, but in meaning. Their stand was more than a battle. It was a message. That message has echoed through the centuries. Freedom is worth fighting for, even against impossible odds.